Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something that really touches everyone, I think, whether you realize it or not.
Hmm.
It's neophobia, the fear of new things.
Right.
And we've pulled together insights from specialties, psychiatry, clinical psychology, even biomedical research to really dig into it.
Exactly. And, neophobia might sound like a very technical term, maybe a bit intimidating,
Yeah, it does a bit.
but the tendency itself is incredibly common. Think about it. We all have things we're a bit hesitant to try, right?
Sure.
So our goal today is really to unpack what neophobia actually means, especially when we talk about food, which is a big one,
Okay.
and maybe explore why we even have this kind of inclination in the first place.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then. Neophobia is, well, a fear of the new.
Fundamentally, yes.
And our sources mention it can range quite a bit, like from a really strong, persistent, almost abnormal fear
Oh,
to
yeah.
just, preferring routine. Someone who's just not that keen on trying new things.
Yeah, a milder form. And it often comes up with kids, doesn't it? That term food neophobia.
Oh, yeah. That classic rejection of unfamiliar foods. Every parent knows that one.
Exactly. But, the core insight here, and this is interesting, is that some level of caution towards the unknown, it actually helped species survive, kept them safe from potential dangers.
Oh, okay. That makes evolutionary sense.
Yeah. And what's fascinating, too, is how deep this idea goes. The word neophobia, it's
Hmm.
Greek, right?
Mm-hmm.
Neos for new or young, and phobos for fear.
Simple enough.
But it's not the only one. There's like a whole family of related terms, also from Greek.
Mm.
Things like cainophobia,
Kenophobia.
yeah, from kainos, which means new or fresh. And there are others too, like metathesiophobia. It
Wow.
just shows how, this idea of newness and how we react to it has been part of our thinking for a long, long time.
It's like our brains are kind of wired to pause when something's new. Give it a second look.
Pretty much. And it's not just humans either.
Right. You mentioned species surviving. What kind of
Mhm.
examples did the research show?
Well, one really clear example is with Norway rats and house mice.
Okay.
As they adapted to living alongside humans who were, let's face it, trying to get rid of them.
Uh-huh, yeah. Mousetraps and baits.
Exactly. They actually seem to evolve more neophobia. Think about it. If humans suddenly put out a new kind of bait or a different trap,
The wary ones survive.
the ones that are naturally cautious, that hesitate before approaching that strange new object or smell, those are the ones more likely to live, breed, and pass on those wary genes.
So that fear, or at least caution, became a real survival advantage for them in that specific environment.
Precisely. It really highlights the adaptive side of having some level of neophobia. Being wary of something new, especially if it could be dangerous, well, it just makes sense evolutionarily.
Okay.
We also see neophobia pop up in older animals sometimes.
Ah, interesting. Why is that? Is it the same thing?
Well, that raises a good question. Is it purely a fear of the unknown kicking in more? Or could it be something else, maybe uh, apathy or changes in the brain, like in the prefrontal cortex pathways?
You mean like less drive to explore things?
Yeah, potentially. Less engagement with novelty altogether. So it might not always be a simple fear response in older animals. It's a bit more complex.
That's a really interesting distinction. Now, one of our sources, Robert Anton Wilson, he had a pretty strong take on this in his book Prometheus Rising.
Ah, yes. Wilson, what was his angle?
He suggested that neophobia becomes almost instinctual, especially after people have children, like a protective mechanism, maybe.
Okay,
But
awesome.
he saw it very negatively as a major roadblock, a hindrance to cultural and intellectual
A
progress.
hindrance. So he felt this fear of the new stops societies from adopting useful changes or ideas.
Yeah, that seems to be the gist. He even connected it to Thomas Kuhn's idea, about scientific revolutions.
Oh, the paradigm shifts.
Right. Kuhn argued new ideas often only really take hold when the older generation, who sees them as radically new and maybe threatening, is replaced by a younger one that grows up with them.
Hmm. That's an interesting perspective, maybe a bit pessimistic.
Maybe.
But is it always the newness itself that older generations resist? Or could it be more about the disruption? the challenge to how they already understand the world.
That's a fair point. It makes you think about innovation, why some ideas catch on fast and others face such pushback.
Definitely.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and focus specifically on food neophobia, because our sources really highlight how common and significant this is, particularly with kids.
Right, the fear of eating unfamiliar foods.
And it's important to clarify, isn't it, that while it's often seen in things like avoidant restrictive food intake disorder,
Yes, ARFID?
it's not actually a disorder by itself.
Correct. It's a symptom or a behavior pattern, not a diagnosis on its own. And as you said, incredibly common in toddlers and young children. That picky eating phase.
We have all been there or seen it.
Absolutely. And it seems linked often to a person's general level of sensation seeking.
Meaning,
Well, individuals who are generally lower in sensation seeking, less drawn to novel experiences, thrills, that sort of thing, they also tend to be the ones less willing to try new foods.
okay, so it connects to broader personality traits.
It seems to, yes.
Yeah.
And this can cause real worry for parents, Candace.
Oh, definitely. Frustration at meal times, anxiety about growth, nutrition.
Are they getting enough vitamins? Are they
Yeah.
healthy? It's a lot. And that's where pediatricians and family doctors really step in, offering guidance and hopefully reassurance.
Because it's also key to remember that preferring familiar foods isn't automatically a problem, right?
Not at all. Most of us have some degree of food neophobia. It's really a spectrum,
The spectrum.
and there are actually ways to measure it. Tools like the Food Neophobia Scale, the FNS, it's a self-report survey for adults.
And there's one for kids, too.
Yes, the FNSC, where parents report on their child's behaviors. It helps get a sense of where someone falls on that spectrum.
Interesting. And you mentioned animals before. Is their food neophobia the same as what we see in kids?
Well, there's a distinction researchers make.
Yeah.
In animals, food neophobia often refers to that short initial hesitation, like, whoa, what's this new thing?
Okay.
That's different from something called dietary conservatism, where an animal might refuse a new food for a much longer time.
Right. A prolonged refusal.
Now, that specific long-term dietary conservatism hasn't really been formally demonstrated in humans in the same way. But, the really persistent fussy eating you sometimes see in children, it kind of resembles it.
Okay, I see the parallel.
It gives us a way to think about the different levels of reluctance.
And this all ties back to something called the omnivore's dilemma, doesn't it?
Exactly. As creatures who can eat a huge variety of things, we face this constant choice. Is this new potential food safe, or should I stick with the tried and true?
That calculation we're always making, maybe subconsciously.
Precisely. So, building on that evolutionary idea we discussed,
That caution helps survival.
you can see how it applies directly to food. A little bit of wariness, a bit of neophobia could literally save you from eating something poisonous.
Makes perfect sense when you put it like that.
So, okay, we know what it is. We've seen some examples. What about the causes? Where does this tendency come from, especially with food? Let's start with genetics.
The nature versus nurture question.
Well, our sources suggest nature plays a pretty big role here. Genetics seem quite significant.
How significant?
Some research, especially twin studies, suggests maybe around 2/3, like 66% of the variation we see in food neophobia between people might be down to their genes.
Wow, 2/3. That's huge.
It's a substantial genetic component, yeah. Those twin studies, comparing identical and fraternal twins, really point towards a strong hereditary link.
But it can't be all genes, right? What about the nurture side? Environment, experiences?
Oh, absolutely, not all genes. Psychosocial factors are definitely important, especially early in life.
Like what?
Well, think about young kids. They watch everything, and they pick up cues from their parents, especially around food.
So if mom or dad always turns their nose up at broccoli,
The child might learn that broccoli is something to be avoided too. Parental food preferences and eating habits can really influence a child's developing neophobic tendencies.
that makes sense. Learning by example.
Exactly. And then there are sensory factors.
Sensory, you mean taste and smell.
Primarily taste, yeah. Some people are just more sensitive to certain tastes, especially bitterness.
Yeah, the classic bitter vegetable struggle.
Right. And that heightened sensitivity might make them naturally less inclined to try new foods, particularly things like leafy greens. And interestingly, some research suggests this sensitivity could even be linked to things like a history of middle ear infections.
Really? Ear infections? How?
It's thought that infections might affect the nerves involved in taste perception. Or it could be linked to being a super taster,
A super taster. What's
Huh?
that?
someone who just has a higher density of taste buds on their tongue. They experience tastes especially bitterness, much more intensely.
Fascinating. So genetics, parental influence, even how intensely you taste things, it's all mixing together.
It's a complex mix, for sure. And importantly, how parents react to picky eating can also influence things.
How so?
Well, the sources are pretty clear. Pressuring kids, forcing them or punishing them for not eating foods they dislike, that can really backfire.
It makes it worse.
Yeah, it can entrench the avoidance, create negative associations with food and mealtimes. It generally makes the problem worse in the long run.
Okay, so pressure is out. What actually works then? How can parents or individuals address food neophobia?
Well, the more effective strategies tend to focus on positive reinforcement and gentle persistence,
Like?
offering small, non-food rewards, think stickers, maybe extra playtime, just for tasting a new food. Not for finishing it, just for trying.
Lowering the stakes.
Exactly. And maybe even more crucial, parents modeling the behavior they want to see.
Leading by example again.
Yes. Enthusiastically eating and enjoying a variety of foods, including new ones, sends a really powerful positive message. Kids see that it's safe, maybe even enjoyable.
Makes sense. And what about just getting used to the food?
Repeated exposure is
What-
absolutely key.
Ugh.
But, and this is important, just looking at the new food on the plate usually isn't enough.
They have to taste it.
Yes.
Yeah.
The research suggests tasting is necessary, and it often takes multiple tries, maybe 10, even up to 15 separate tasting experiences before a child might start to accept a new food.
15 tries. Wow, that requires patience.
It does. It's like their taste system and their brain needs that repeated input to become familiar and comfortable with the novel taste and texture.
So persistence, but positive persistence.
That's a good way to put it. There also seems to be something about timing.
Timing.
Yeah, there might be a kind of critical window during weaning when babies are starting solids.
Okay.
Introducing a wide variety of flavors and textures early on during that period,
Yeah.
it might actually help lower the chances of significant food neophobia developing later.
Sort of setting the stage for acceptance early.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
And related to that, there's even a theory about breast milk.
Go on.
The idea is that the flavors from the mother's diet get into the breast milk. So if the mother eats a varied diet, the baby is exposed to a subtle range of flavors very early.
And that might make them more open to new food tastes later.
That's the hypothesis. More early flavor variety equals greater acceptance down the line. It's an interesting idea.
It really is. So lots of potential factors and strategies. Is there good news? Does it get better on its own?
Yes, generally it does. Our sources consistently point out that food neophobia tends to naturally decrease as people get older.
So there's hope for picky kids. And maybe picky adults, too.
Definitely. Palates can and do broaden over time for most people.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground. Neophobia, it's this really complex but actually pretty common thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. It has these deep evolutionary roots, a significant genetic component we talked about.
Right, the twin studies.
And it shows up in our behavior in all sorts of ways,
Mhm.
but especially, as we focused on, in our food choices, particularly during childhood.
And it's really important to remember that difference between like a brief initial caution that, hang on, what's this moment?
Yeah, that short-term wariness.
And a more persistent, maybe ingrained pattern of avoiding new things.
Exactly. One might just be a useful protective instinct, while the other could potentially limit our experiences, our diets, maybe even our personal growth.
And for you, our listener, always curious, always looking for those aha moments.
Hopefully.
We hope this deep dive into neophobia gives you maybe a new lens, a different way to look at your own preferences, perhaps, or even to understand some of those bigger societal trends, why some new ideas or technologies get adopted really quickly and others just seem to face constant resistance.
Yeah, it might offer some insights there. Which leads us to maybe a final thought for you to chew on.
Okay.
Given that having some level of neophobia seems to have been genuinely useful for survival, evolutionarily speaking.
Right, protecting us.
How does that innate caution work for us, or maybe against us today? How does it both protect us from potential harm, but also potentially limit our experiences, limit progress, both for us as individuals and maybe for society as a whole?
Where's the balance?
Exactly. Where is that balance between healthy caution and unhealthy restriction? It's a fascinating tightrope we all walk, isn't it?
Yeah.